Good evening. Thank you for taking your seats. My name is Robert Weston, and I'm the Vice President of the SFU Alumni Association. We represent over 130,000 graduates in over 130 countries. I'm also very proudly an SFU economics alumni of 38 years ago. It ages me a bit. On behalf of Simon Fraser University, I'd like to welcome you to the BMO Public Lecture, Who Gets What and Why? The Economics of Life Choices from School Admissions to Kidney Exchanges. The Bank of Montreal Lecture Series brings distinguished academics and speakers to SFU to give public lectures on topics of interest to the community in general. The event is sponsored in partnership with the Bank of Montreal, SFU Alumni Association, SFU Economics, and SFU Public Square. It's also my privilege to acknowledge that we are gathered here this evening on the traditional territories of the Coast Salish people, including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Stolo, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Let me now welcome Steve Mongrain, Associate Chair of the Department of Economics at Simon Fraser University, to introduce our speaker, Dr. Alvin Roth.
Welcome, everybody. We are delighted this year to have the opportunity of listening to 2012 Nobel Prize winner. I could go along and talk about prominent publication and stuff like that, but I think the Nobel Prize kind of resumed it nicely. Thank you and welcome, and we'll go on with the presentation.
Thank you. Let's see if my lapel mic will work, and let me come back to the beginning of my talk. So I'm not sure I can live up to the whole title I was given, but I will try to expand your notion of what constitute markets, and maybe in the question and answers I can give you advice about life choices. So who gets what and why is about what economics is about, and I actually wrote a book by that name. And what I want to talk to you about today is market design and matching markets. And market design is sort of a new thing for academic economists, but it's not a new thing. Markets are ancient human artifacts. When archaeologists find stone tools thousands of miles from where they were quarried and made, that's a sign that our distant ancestors were already trading among themselves. And so markets are human artifacts, and they're a little bit like languages. There are a lot of different languages, and there are a lot of different kinds of markets and marketplaces. But languages aren't very designable, right? I'm speaking to you in English pretty much the way I received it, and if I were to write a book with improved English spellings, you'd think that I was illiterate. But markets tend to have interested groups of users and sometimes proprietors. And so markets are human artifacts, but we don't always have to take them the way we receive them. We can sometimes fix them when they're broken and try to make them work better. And there are lots of different kinds of markets. Often when we think about markets, we think about commodity markets, and I'll speak for a moment about those. But there are lots of markets that aren't impersonal at all, markets in which you care with whom you're dealing and in which prices don't do all the work. So let's think a little bit about commodity markets, which are markets where prices can do all the work. And think about the New York Stock Exchange. When you buy 100 shares of some company that's traded on the New York Stock Exchange, you don't care who you're buying them from. You don't care whether they took good care of those shares while they had them. And they don't worry whether you'll take good care of them. The only thing that's at issue is the price. And the job of the New York Stock Exchange is to discover the price at which supply equals demand at each moment in the day for each of the financial commodities that they trade in. But lots of markets aren't commodity markets. I teach at Stanford University, and Stanford doesn't find its entering class by raising the tuition until supply equals demand. We don't fill our seats that way. There's this whole other complicated procedures of applications and interviews and essays and admissions. And lots of people who can afford to go to Stanford, nevertheless, aren't invited to attend. And so matching markets, college admissions is a matching market. Matching markets are markets in which you can't just choose what you want, even if you can afford it. You also have to be chosen. And lots of markets are matching markets, just like you can't just enroll at Stanford. You can't just show up at Google and say that you're going to work there. You have to be hired. And Google doesn't hire its engineers by lowering the wage until just enough engineers want to show up. And they can't just choose which engineers they hire either. They have to compete with Facebook. So these are markets that, labor markets, college admissions, these are markets that are more than a little like marriage markets. There's courtship involved. You can't just choose your spouse. You also have to be chosen. And so there are going to be a lot of institutions that these markets need in order to work, other than just institutions of setting prices, institutions of price discovery. So let's think a little bit about what marketplaces do. Often economists talk about markets, but entrepreneurs build marketplaces. So what is it that marketplaces have to accomplish in order to make a market work well? Well, first they have to bring enough people together who want to transact with each other. They have to make the market thick. And then once the market becomes thick, once there are all these people ready to transact with each other, there could be congestion. I might have to talk to a lot of you to find out who I wanted to do a deal with, and it would take time. And while I was talking to some of you, others of you might be making deals already and leaving the market. So the marketplace would have to help us deal with that congestion. And then it would have to make it a safe place to exchange the information that we need to exchange in order to find efficient transactions. So let's take Airbnb for an example, just to make this clear. How did Airbnb establish thickness? When they started, incidentally, I was going to use Uber, but I understand Vancouver isn't a good city to talk about Uber. When Airbnb started, they were a website and they bought up competitors so that they'd have a thick market. They wanted to be able to serve travelers to lots of destinations so that when you were looking for a place to go, Airbnb would be a natural place to look because they would have lots of places to stay. And when you were thinking of renting an apartment or a room in your house, Airbnb would be a natural place to list it because they would have lots of travelers who wanted to come. But once they became a thick market, their competition stopped being other websites that were offering rooms, and they started to be big hotel companies. Right? Airbnb is a giant decentralized, well, partly decentralized hotel companies, and they started to have this problem of congestion. There are lots of rooms you could rent, and lots of travelers who might want to rent them, and they're a little hard to rent. One way to think about it is, supposing if you wanted to rent a room at the Hilton Hotel in San Francisco, instead of at Airbnb, supposing you wanted to rent a room in Hilton Hotel, but for some reason you were only allowed to inquire about one room at a time. So you'd call up the Hilton Hotel and you'd say, next Friday, I'd like a room. And they'd say, which room? You'd say, well, how about room 528? And they'd say, I'm so sorry, that room is already booked. And you'd say to them, don't hang up, but it would be too late. They'd have hung up. And that's the problem that Airbnb has. Many of its proprietors only have a single room or a single apartment that they're renting. So if you can't rent that one, you have to try again and say, how about room 579? How about room 612? So it would have been hard, it was hard for Airbnb to get going when people would put up their rooms, when hosts would put up their rooms on their laptops before they went to work, and then they would come home after work, look at the laptop. I would see that 6 of you had been interested in renting my room for next Friday. I would confirm it for one of you, and the other 5, I'd have to say, sorry, that room is not available, and you'd have to start again. So Airbnb very aggressively became a smartphone marketplace in which they pushed apps to their hosts so that they can check them online while they're at work. They can also, the Airbnb also decided that once someone tries to reserve my room, but before I've confirmed it, it no longer appears when you look for rooms. So that when I finally do confirm it, I don't have to say no to 5 people. And that makes the search go quicker, and that's a way of dealing with congestion. Now, Airbnb also has to deal with congestion in other ways. They used to have a helpline that was the same line for everyone. If you needed help, you would call the number and you would be served in the order in which you'd called up. And that meant that Someone who was thinking of taking a vacation in Hawaii in 2 months and who wanted some information about Airbnb might be on the line ahead of someone who was standing in front of an apartment finding that the key wasn't where it was supposed to be and that he couldn't get in. And so another kind of congestion was that they have separate helplines for if you're trying to get into the apartment that you've rented and if you're just calling for information. And lastly, of course, there's a lot of issues of trust and safety in a market where people are going to come and stay in your home, you're going to come and stay in people's home. Will the pictures be an accurate representation? So if I wanted to rent Airbnb in Vancouver, I could look at lots of pictures, but also get some information on how other travelers had enjoyed these rooms and things like that. So Airbnb had a lot of institutional features it had to build to make a working matching market between travelers and hosts. And I've been involved in the course of my career in helping design a number of matching markets. And again, a lot of what you have to think of when you think of any matching market is how to help it be thick, how to deal with congestion, and how to make it safe. And some of these markets that I have up here on the slides are markets where prices, wages, for instance, in labor markets are very important, but they still don't decide who gets what. So doctors in Canada and the US go through a centralized labor clearinghouse. Lots of labor markets have some centralized institutions because it's not price alone, it's not the wage alone that determines who works where. But I've also worked on a number of markets where we don't let prices do any of the work at all. And one group of those markets are school choice systems, and I've helped design them in a number of American cities. The thing about school choice is once you decide to let families participate in choosing which schools their children will go to, the preferences that the families have for schools, the information that the families have about which schools would be good for their children is vital information that you'd like to capture. But it's often hard to make it safe for families to convey that information to the city, because many American cities had school choice procedures in which if you didn't get your first choice, if you didn't get the school that you said was your first choice, you could do very badly indeed, because the school that was your second choice would already have filled its places with people who said that it was their first choice. So your problem in telling the school district what schools you wanted was not of figuring out which schools you wanted. It was of figuring out which schools you could get if you said you wanted them. And that's a very different problem. So one of the things we've done is tried to make it safe in New York and in Boston and Denver and New Orleans, tried to change the system so that it's safe for families to reliably report which schools they want. But that's not the set of marketplaces I'm going to talk about today about that, because there's an even more unusual market that I've been involved in. And I thought that to sort of suggest to you that, which I want to do, that markets are a broader class of things than you usually think of, it would be useful to start with the most unusual of the markets that I've dealt with, which is kidney exchange. So let me tell you a little bit about kidneys and kidney exchange. So the first thing to know about kidneys is that if your kidneys fail, you are very ill, you can stay alive for a while on dialysis, but the treatment of choice is transplantation. But many more people need kidney transplants than there are kidneys. In the United States this morning, there were over 100,000 people waiting on the waiting list for deceased donor kidneys. Now, last year, we only did about 11,000 deceased donor kidney transplants. So the waiting time is long, and it's costly and dangerous. Thousands of people die each year while waiting for kidneys. And in Canada, you also have long waiting lists for kidneys. In 2012, the last year in which I could see national data, you maintain your list regionally, there were 3,400 people waiting for kidneys and only 1,200 received kidneys. So everywhere in the world, there aren't enough kidneys. There aren't enough deceased kidneys. There aren't enough kidneys of any sort. And the situation is similar in Europe. The top curve is how many people are waiting. The bottom lines are donation rates of deceased and living donors. So the special thing about kidneys, one of the many special things about kidneys, is that you have two of them. And if you're as healthy as I hope you are, you can remain healthy with one. So if you loved someone who had kidney disease, you might be able to give them a kidney and save their lives. And last year in the United States, we had about 6,000 transplants from living donors. So we have about 11,000 transplants from deceased donors, about 6,000 transplants from living donors. That means we have more living donors than we have deceased donors. Deceased donors donate 2 kidneys. Living donors donate only 1. So the modal American kidney donor is a living donor. It's a very practical thing to do. It's not a rare event anymore. But sometimes you're healthy enough to give a kidney. Not everyone is. But you're healthy enough to give a kidney to someone who needs it. But you can't give your kidney to the person you love because kidneys have to be matched. They have to fit the physiology of the patient. And that's what opens the door to economics, because if you're incompatible, if there's an incompatible patient-donor pair, sometimes an exchange is possible that allows 2 patients to get compatible kidneys where they couldn't get them from their intended donors. So how does that work? Well, here's a simple kind of exchange. The first pair, donor 1 loves recipient 1 and would like to give her a kidney, but donor 1 has blood type A and recipient 1 has blood type B, and that's a difficult transplant to do. And donor 2 and recipient 2 are in the same situation with the reverse blood types. So there's a blood type B kidney available for the blood type B patient, and there's a blood type A kidney available for the blood type A patient. And through an exchange, 2 people could get a transplant who otherwise wouldn't have one available. So that would be a good thing to do. Notice that no money changes hands. This is an in-kind exchange. It turns out it's against the law in the United States and in Canada to pay money for a kidney. The American law says, it's called the National Organ Transplant Act. It was passed in 1984. It says it shall be unlawful for any person to transfer any human organ for valuable consideration for use in human transplantation. Now, you might look at that kidney exchange and say, wait, that looks like valuable consideration. A kidney is exchanged for a kidney. Maybe this is against American law. When we started doing kidney exchanges 15 years ago, we asked the Justice Department to write us a memo saying that it wasn't against the law, that this wasn't what the act intended to rule out. And they declined to write that memo. But eventually Congress passed an amendment which says the preceding sentence, that sentence, doesn't apply with respect to human organ paired donation, which is paired donation is a polite word for kidney exchange that avoids use of the word exchange and therefore makes valuable consideration less likely. So it turns out that lots of people, there are laws almost everywhere in the world that say you shouldn't be able to buy and sell a kidney. I gave a talk this afternoon where I spoke about that as a repugnant transaction, a transaction that some people would like to engage in and that other people think they shouldn't. But the Norwood Act, it took 3 years to pass, but it passed without opposition. So kidney exchange somehow avoids the repugnance that kidney sales arouse and allows us to increase the number of transplants that are available. In Canada, your laws seem to, again, be regional. Here's what I found for the British Columbia Human Tissue Gift Act. It's actually very similar. It says, this is a 1996 law, it says a person must not buy, sell, or otherwise deal in, directly or indirectly, for valuable consideration, any tissue for a transplant. But also in Canada, kidney exchange is legal. And here's an announcement from 4 years ago when Canadian kidney exchange was pretty new and reached the 100th successful transplant. So kidney exchange, which I'm going to tell you about today, isn't yet as standard in Canada as it is in the United States, but it's becoming more and more standard. And I'm going to tell you about things about kidney exchange in the United States, but the situation in Canada is not too different. It's a couple of years behind. So it's coming along fast. And in Canada also, it's against the law to buy and sell kidneys. It's not against the law to engage in kidney exchange, and so it's a way to get kidneys for Canadians who are dying for them. Now, the 100th kidney exchange transplant in Canada suggests that in Canada, as in the US, there was some success in making the market thick. So now I want to tell you about congestion, right? Because marketplaces, they have to make the market thick, and then once it is thick, they have to be able to deal with congestion, with the time-consuming, difficult parts of transactions that make it hard to do as many transactions as you would like. So let me tell you a little more about a kidney exchange. Here are two photographs that were taken in Cincinnati, Ohio, around 2006. I'm the man in the yellow gown, keeping my hands out of the way. There's a kidney in the bucket on the left-hand picture. And behind me, not in the picture on the right, so you can't see it in the picture, but behind me, just steps away, is another operating room. And a nephrectomy was just performed there. The kidney was removed, and that's how it got into that bucket. And it's going into this gentleman here. And all of this is in Cincinnati, Ohio. Now, at the same time in Toledo, Ohio, another town in Ohio, the donor associated with this patient and the patient associated with the donor of that kidney are undergoing the same set of operations. That is, the donors have traveled. The donor who lived in Toledo came to Cincinnati. The donor who lived in Cincinnati went to Toledo. They're doing this at the same time. Why are they doing it at the same time? And I mean literally at the same time. The surgeons anesthetize the patients. They make the initial incisions. Then they get on their cell phones from the operating room. The guy in the tiger skin hat is a man named Steve Woodle. He gets on the line and he talks to Mike Reese in Toledo, Ohio. And he says, "We're ready here in Cincinnati. Are you ready in Toledo?" And when everyone's ready, then they take the kidney and do the transplant. The reason they do it at the same time, remember, is you can't give valuable consideration for a kidney. Consideration is contract language. It means you can't write a contract on a kidney. You can't say, "We'll give you a kidney today and you'll give us a kidney tomorrow." So to make sure that everything goes through and that no one has a surgery that doesn't help them and doesn't get a kidney, they're done at the same time. But what that means is this is a congested kind of transaction, because to do even this simplest exchange, and we're going to want to do much more complicated exchanges that I'll tell you about, but to do even this simplest exchange simultaneously, 2 nephrectomies, 2 transplants, you need 4 operating rooms and 4 surgical teams available at the same time. So it takes a good deal of work to do even this simple transaction. So you can see that if we've got a thick market in which more complicated transactions might be available, like a 3-way transaction, right, where there's no double coincidence where 2 pairs can change, but donor 1 could give to recipient 2, whose donor could give to recipient 3, whose donor could give to recipient 1. That would require 6 operating rooms and 6 surgical teams. And when we started, our surgical colleagues said to us, that's just more than we can do. If you want to help us do exchanges, you should start by helping us do 2-way exchanges. And that's how we started. But over time, we figured out better ways to organize the logistics. So to tell you about that, let me tell you a little more about what makes kidneys compatible. Okay, who can take whose kidney? Because that's what calls for more complicated exchanges. It's not that anyone can take anyone's kidney, otherwise we wouldn't need exchange. So the first thing is blood type compatibility. You have 2 blood components. There are 2 blood components that we call A and B, and your blood type is which of these blood components you have. And so there are 4 blood types. If you have both of them, your blood type is AB. If you have just one, your blood type is A or B. And if you have none of them, in English we say your blood type is O. In many languages, that's called blood type 0 to indicate that you don't have any of the blood components. And the simple rule of kidney compatibility by blood types is you can't easily take a kidney from someone who has a blood component that you do not have. Okay, so if you are a blood type O patient, you can only take a blood type O kidney. If you are a blood type A patient, you can take an O or an A. If you're a blood type AB, you can take anything, an O or an A or a B or an AB. And if you're a blood type O donor, you can give to anyone. And if you're a blood type AB donor, you can only give to people who are blood type AB. In the United States, only 4% of the population is blood type AB. About half the population is blood type O. But because kidney exchange is congested and for reasons that I won't fully go into, transplant centers are reluctant to recommend kidney exchange to people who who are compatible with their donor. If you come with your brother or your sister to get tested to see if your brother or sister can give you a kidney, and they can, then most hospitals in the US and in Canada will not suggest that you participate in kidney exchange, even though that could get you a better kidney, and I might tell you about that a little bit. Instead, they'll say, you know, it's great, your sister wants to give you a kidney, and she can. Let's all meet at 5:30 next Tuesday morning in the operating room, and we'll do it. And so if that were so mostly what we're seeing in kidney exchange, in multi-hospital, inter-hospital kidney exchanges, are going to be incompatible patient-donor pairs. So if blood type incompatibility were the only kind of incompatibility, we would never see any blood type O donors because they would always be compatible with the people they wanted to give to. But that's not the only kind of incompatibility. There's also immunological incompatibility. And that comes from the fact that you can have antibodies to some of the proteins, the human leukocyte antigens, in your donor's kidney, in your potential donor's kidney. So, for example, the chance that one of you can take my kidney is somewhat over 50%. But the chance that my wife can take my kidney is only about 30%. And that's because my wife and I are parents. And in the course of childbirth, my wife's immune system might have been exposed to some of the proteins that our boys inherit from me. You get half your proteins from your mom and half your proteins from your dad. And if her immune system were exposed in the right way, she might have preformed antibodies prepared to attack my kidney should it appear. And that would make it hard for her to take my kidney. And the percent of reactive antibodies that a patient has determine just how hard it is to find them a kidney apart from their blood type, how hard it is to find them a kidney from a blood type compatible donor. So your percent reactive antibody is a number between 0 and 100%. And as it climbs towards 100%, that means you won't be able to take almost 100% of the kidneys that come to you from blood type compatible donors. So you'll be hard to find a kidney for. Now, when we look at the general population of kidney patients in the United States, only about 10% of them have pretty high PRA. So it doesn't look like it's going to be a big problem. But it turns out it is a big problem for reasons I'll tell you about a little bit, which have to do with the same thing I said when I said if you're compatible with your donor, most hospitals will not refer you to kidney exchange. Even if you're incompatible with your donor, if you're not highly sensitized, if there's a big transplant center, they might be able to do an internal exchange. They might find another pair that they can do an exchange with. That didn't happen 10 years ago. 10 years ago, kidney exchange was completely new. And hospitals went through the multi-hospital kidney exchanges. But today in the United States, it's a standard form of transplantation. So every director of a big transplant center has a lot of experience with kidney exchange and can say to you, you know, we can't find a kidney for you this week, but next week, you know, don't worry. Next week, someone will come in, you're a blood type, you're a pair, a patient-donor pair with blood types A and B. Next week, a pair with patients B and A will come in and there'll be an easy exchange. So what we've started to see is a higher proportion of hard-to-match pairs. So let me tell you how we think about these pairs, because what our data looks like, so what's a thick market mean? It means we have a big data set of patient-donor pairs, and we start to have information of who can take a kidney from whom. So think of our data as being a picture like this, where a circle, each pair is represented by a circle, and an arrow goes from pair 5 to pair 4, say, if the kidney from the donor in pair 5 is compatible with the patient in pair 4. So that allows us to see, for example, that we might be able to do a two-way exchange between pair 4 and pair 5. Or we might be able to do a two-way exchange between pair 3 and pair 2. Or we might be able to do a three-way exchange between pairs 1, 2, and 3. And there are also these chains that I want to tell you a little bit about. Okay? But notice, before I tell you about the chains, notice that one of the things, remember, that marketplaces have to do is they have to make it safe for people to reveal the information that's needed to find good transactions. So there's a lot of information in a picture like that that is privately known to the patients, the donors, the surgeons, and the transplant centers. Some of that information is which patient-donor pairs are available, right? Some transplant centers don't show us all of their patient-donor pairs. But a lot of the information is privately held by patients. For example, if, God forbid, you should need a kidney, this would be bad news. You would go home, in the US we're going to have Thanksgiving, American Thanksgiving next week. You would go home to your family at Thanksgiving and you'd say, I've got some terrible news, I need a kidney. And your brother and your sister and your cousin and your aunt, all the people who love you, would say, well, maybe I can give you a kidney. And they'd all get tested. And maybe they would all be incompatible, in which case you would now be a prime candidate for kidney exchange. But what we'd like is that you tell us about all of those people so we can say, look at pair 3, it has a lot of connections. Pair 3 is connected to pair 1 because your sister can give a kidney to the donor in pair 1, and pair 3 is connected to pair 2 because your brother can give a kidney to the donor in pair 2. That's information that only you have. What would be a bad design? What would be an unsafe design that would make it unsafe for you to tell us that? Well, we could, for instance, decide to give priority to people who have only a single donor. Right? We could say, people who have multiple donors are already pretty lucky. Let's try to do transplants first for people who have only one donor. And then when your brother and your sister and your uncle and your aunt say to you, we can give you kidneys, sign us up, you would say to them, I've talked to my surgeon, and she advises me that I shouldn't come with a lot of donors because people get priority if they only have a single donor, so let's try one at a time. And then when we looked at the graph, we wouldn't see all those arcs out of pair 3. We'd just see one of them, perhaps. So the way we do it now gives you the incentive to sign up all your willing donors. Only one of them will give a kidney, but the fact that you can exchange with many pairs will give you more chances and will give other people more chances to get a kidney. So safety here has something to do with revealing the information that will allow good exchanges to be found. And what's a good exchange? Well, in a graph like this, you might say, if what we're trying to do, and we sometimes are, is get as many transplants as possible. It looks like you can get 8 transplants here. If we did the two-way exchange between pair 3 and pair 2, we would leave pair 1 out, and we don't have to leave pair 1 out. There's an exchange that includes pair 1. So let me tell you about this chain on the bottom that starts with a non-directed donor, because non-directed donors have become very important in American kidney exchange. And they've become particularly important in getting transplants for very highly sensitized patients. So what's a non-directed donor? Sometimes someone comes to a transplant center or identifies themselves in some other way and says, I'd like to give a kidney, and I don't have a particular recipient in mind. Okay. Needless to say, when you show up like that, you're subjected to some stringent examination. Anyone who wants to give a kidney, even if you want to give it to your sister, is examined quite thoroughly, medically and psychologically. And non-directed donors get particular scrutiny. But the possibility that I'm going to show you is that a non-directed donor might be able to spark a chain of transplants and cause a number of transplants to happen. So let's think about that. Before we had kidney exchange, we had non-directed donors. And after you passed through all the hoops that you had to pass through, and they used to be quite considerable. There was a good deal of suspicion of non-directed donors 10, 15 years ago. If they decided it was okay, this was you were fully in control of your decision, then they would say to you, that it's a great thing you want to do. You can give a kidney to someone on the waiting list, and you'll save their life. And it's a great thing to do. But now that we have a thick marketplace, now that we have a data set of patient-donor pairs ready to transact, we can offer a more enticing possibility to a non-directed donor. We can say, you could give to the recipient in pair 1, whose donor will give a kidney to the recipient pair 2, whose donor will give to someone on the waiting list. And these are people who were waiting for transplants, but may have had to wait a long time because maybe they are hard to match pairs, but you can spark this chain. So when we used to do chains like that, like this, they would have 6 people in the picture. And that's because there are 3 donors and 3 recipients. And one question you can ask is, how come only 6? And one answer is that we were doing the surgery simultaneously, and we'd gotten up to the point where we could get more than 4 operating rooms and surgical teams together at the same time. But 6 was, and for many hospitals still is, about as many teams as you could assemble to do a transaction. So we started to think, let's think again about whether we could do longer chains, because because when you have highly sensitized patients, there's a lot of reason to do long chains. Let's think why that's true. Suppose each of us represents a patient-donor pair, but we're all highly sensitized. That means it's really hard for us to find a kidney that we can take a kidney from any given donor. That means the chance that I can give you a kidney if you're highly sensitized is very small. But in a big room like this, the chance that I can give someone a kidney is not so small. So maybe I can give a kidney to someone out there. Now, we're a patient-donor pair, and we're highly sensitized too. So the chance that the guys we can give a kidney to can give a kidney back to us is really, really small. But the chance they can give a kidney to someone else in the room isn't so small, and the chance that they can give a kidney to someone else isn't so small, and again and again and again. So we could start generating a pretty long chain. But if we can only do 6 at a time, then those long chains won't be things that we can do. So let's think again why we did surgeries simultaneously. We always do these simple ones simultaneously, but let me imagine that we didn't to explain why. Supposing on day 1, donor 2 successfully gives a kidney to recipient 1, donor 2 doesn't have a kidney anymore. And on day 2, donor 1 fails to give a kidney to recipient 2, so there's a broken link there. That really harms pair 2. They've had a surgery that didn't help them, they didn't get a kidney in return, and they no longer have a kidney, so that next week when we run another kidney exchange, they can't participate. So they've really been badly harmed, so we never let that happen. We always do those simultaneously. But suppose that a non-directed donor comes along. Now we can organize a chain so that no pair gives a kidney until they get one. So now on day 1, the non-directed donor gives a kidney to recipient 1. On day 2, donor 1 fails to give a kidney to recipient 2. That's very disappointing. But it's not a tragic harm to pair 2. They still have a kidney. Next week we can get them a kidney when we run a kidney exchange. So the cost of a broken link is much less. We can explore the possible benefit. And the first non-simultaneous chain, the hero of this story is Mike Reese, the guy who was in Toledo, Ohio. He's the first author of this paper. It's got economists and computer scientists and a lot of surgeons on it. And the first chain had 20 people in the picture. Okay, there they are. And the reason that these chains are so important is that a lot of the patients are highly sensitized, right? And so it's hard to find short exchanges, simple exchanges that get them kidneys. Let's show you what I mean by highly sensitized. Remember, only 10% of the general American patient population has a PRA, a sensitization, over 80%. But in 2 of the big American exchanges with which I do a lot of work, the National Kidney Registry and the Alliance for Paired Donation, they have almost identical distributions here. They have a big mode of people whose sensitivity, whose PRA is over 95%. That means there's very little chance they can take a kidney. And in fact, when you blow up the part of the graph that's 95 to 100, what you see is a lot of them have 100% PRA. What does that mean? It means when we enroll them, we have maybe 400 pairs at a time. When we enroll them, none of the donors in the pool can give them a kidney. They have antibodies to 100% of them. So we're looking for needles in haystacks. And this is where chains are important. Here's a picture of an actual data set, a little snapshot. Remember what it means. Each circle is a patient-donor pair, and an arrow goes from one pair to another if the kidney can go from one pair to another. And everyone in this picture, all the patients and all the donors, have blood type A. So there's no problem with blood type in this picture. But nevertheless, you see there are only 8 pairs that have a lot of arrows pointing into them. Those are the low sensitized pairs. Everyone else, it's going to be really hard to find them a kidney. If you picked up the blue nodes and shook them, you'd get a picture that looked a little like this jellyfish. Densely connected at the top, those are the blue nodes. And then there are these chains of highly sensitized patients. Here's a better model. We've got low sensitized patients at top and high sensitized patients at the bottom. And I've suppressed all the many arrows that go among the lowly sensitized patients because it's sort of a waste to match two easy to match pairs to each other. What you'd like to do is use the easy to match pairs to start to form chains among the hard to match pairs. And when you run out of opportunities, you go back to an easy to match pair, which isn't so hard to do because they're easy to match. And that way you can string together long chains starting from a single non-directed donor. And some of these chains are pretty long. Here's one that has 60 people in the picture. Okay, now this is an unusually long chain. It's no longer the longest. It was the longest in 2012. But the average chain in the United States produces 5 transplants. Okay, so 5 is a lot more than 1, and some of them are very short and some of them are very long. But what that means is we've overcome the congestion that stopped us from doing big exchanges. And it's the non-directed donors who allow us to do that. Here in Canada, in Vancouver, the St. Paul's Hospital took part in a Canada-wide exchange that had 10 transplants, 20 people in the picture. Okay? Actually, I'm not sure that that's what it says. It may be 5 transplants, 10 people in the picture. I'm not helping to organize the Canadian exchanges. And it's spreading around the world. It's not just in the United States and Canada. In the United States, it's become about 10% of the living donations in the United States, right? We have about 6,000 a year, a little less. And about 10% of them are now done through kidney exchange. So it's growing pretty rapidly. There's plenty of room to grow. It's growing around the world. There are, in a small way, I have a blog, and these are blog posts from my blog. It's called Market Design. But one of the things I notice when they show up is kidney exchanges in new places. But there are lots of places where there aren't so many kidney exchanges and aren't so many transplants. So here's a worldwide picture, and what you see is the United States and Canada are in the fortunate part of the picture. The blue bars are deceased donor transplants per million population. The pink bars, I guess, are living donor transplants per million population. And if you live to the right of the picture, you're living in a country that's doing around as well as anyone does right now, which isn't very well at all. Remember, in the United States, which is pretty far to the right there, we have 100,000 people waiting for deceased donor kidneys right now. So hardly a record to be proud of. On the other hand, there are parts of the world where transplantation is not available at all. I highlighted Nigeria, but in fact, I'm going to tell you a little more about the Philippines. Because one of the questions is, so we in the developed world and many countries in the developing world share a problem. We don't have enough, we aren't able to do enough kidney transplants for our citizens who have kidney disease. But we have different obstacles. In the developed world, we don't have enough organs. In the developing world, the obstacles tend to be financial. In the Philippines, the national health insurance gives you, I think, 46 or 48 days of dialysis. If you need dialysis, you need to go 3 times a week forever until you get a transplant. So in many of these countries, kidney disease is a death sentence. So there's some possibility of mutual aid. We can help them and they can help us by inviting patient-donor pairs from places where transplantation is not available to participate in developed world kidney exchange. So let me tell you about a proposal that we're starting to put forward. I'm not sure how optimistic I am that this will happen, but many unlikely things have happened. So there's some chance we can do this. We can say, let's do a kidney exchange it'll be the same kind of kidney exchange that I've just been telling you about, but one pair will be from the United States, and they'll be incompatible because of tissue type sensitivity typically, and another pair will be from the Philippines, and they'll be incompatible because in the Philippines they can't get a transplant. There are good surgeons in the Philippines. There are some transplants that happen in the Philippines, but many, many, many Filipinos can't afford them. They don't have access to them. So we could invite them to the United States. The question is, how would we pay for this? Oh, incidentally, here's a first pair. And they took part in an American exchange. And they took part in a husband and wife who couldn't manage to get a transplant in the Philippines, who came to the United States. And were part of a pair where they facilitated the transplant of an American, in this case of several Americans. Well, it turns out every time you transplant an American, you save Medicare $250,000 because dialysis is a lot more expensive than transplantation. Transplantation is expensive. It costs about $120,000 a transplant in the United States, and it costs $20,000 a year afterward for immunosuppressive drugs. So it's not cheap, but dialysis is really expensive. And transplantation is also the closer to being a cure, right? After you get a transplanted kidney, you can get up again and go back to work, whereas dialysis works less and less well for you over time, and you're really tied to the machine. So right now, we could afford to bring foreign pairs, pay for their operations, pay for their immunosuppressive drugs for the rest of their lives with the savings that accrue to Americans who get transplants, who aren't getting transplants because there aren't enough organs. Now, you have to ask a question whenever you think of a new policy, a new design. You have to say, how about when this gets going? Will it still work? Turns out, even when waiting times for Americans to get kidneys shrink far below what they are today, and when waiting times shrink, dialysis costs will shrink because dialysis is something you pay for every day for years and years. Even if the average dialysis cost shrinks to less than the cost of transplanting a foreign pair, it will still make sense because the patients who will get transplanted, the Americans who will get transplanted, will be the hard-to-match pairs, and those would have longer dialysis times than the average times. So when you start analyzing, is this a feasible thing? It looks very feasible. And the hard part is not going to be the medical logistics, it's going to be the financial logistics, because the financial engineering, because the savings accrue to Medicare. I'm sure Canada has bureaucratic healthcare systems as well, but Medicare is a very bureaucratic organization. I spend some of the worst hours of my life on conference calls with 36 people on the line talking about kidney policy. So, loosely speaking, we've done some remarkable things, but it's impossible to imagine that Medicare will ever write a check for a Philippine pair, for people who are not covered by Medicare. So the question is how to organize the savings that accrue to Medicare to offset some of the costs to transplant a foreign pair, which will accrue to transplant centers. And one way to do that would be through some other organization that takes part in the American federal budget, like USAID. Another way to do it would be through private insurers, which are responsible for kidney patients for the first 33 months, after which they're taken over by Medicare. So the hard part of this will not be surgery logistics, it'll be finance logistics. But there's congestion there too. Now, kidney exchange is logistically complicated, and to deal with foreign pairs would be even more complicated. So one question is, why is it against the law everywhere to buy and sell kidneys? It's not against the law everywhere. There's a single country in the world in which there's a legal monetary market for kidneys, and that's the Islamic Republic of Iran. But almost everywhere else, it's against the law to buy and sell kidneys. So, I gave a lecture this afternoon, a public lecture at the other university, as I've heard it called. And I talked about repugnant transactions. So say a transaction is repugnant if some people would like to do it, but other people don't think they should. And so kidneys, buying and selling kidneys is a repugnant transaction. So when you think about a proposal like global kidney exchange, where we're going to invite patient-donor pairs from poor countries to come to rich countries, one of the things you have to think about is that going to look like an illegal black market where we are buying kidneys from poor people so that rich people can have them, right? And this is a real concern. So another constraint on markets is that sometimes transactions that look good to economists look repugnant to non-economists. So, for sure, we're going to have to think about this. Many people are going to think of this as if we were buying the kidneys, which is illegal everywhere. And the reason we despise the black markets, which exist around the world quite widely. When a transaction is repugnant, remember, it's because some people want to do it and other people don't want them to. So it's hard to suppress the black markets. I visited one in Baku in Azerbaijan. What's wrong with those black markets is to engage in them, you're committing a crime. You're committing a crime in your home country, you're committing a crime in Azerbaijan. So if you're a donor, a seller, who goes to Baku to sell your kidney, you're going to return to Moldova or Ukraine and not get adequate medical care. You may not be paid all the things you were promised, right? You're dealing with criminals. That's what black markets are. So there's a natural reason to think that we really don't want to do anything that looks anyway like a black market. And then in particular, we'll have to make sure that if we're going to do global kidney exchange, the health outcomes of the patient-donor pair from the developing countries will have to be really excellent, which is hard to do because health outcomes of people in developing countries are not always really excellent. But it's clear that we somehow, if this is going to be a feasible plan, has to take really, really good care of the foreign pairs, because otherwise it will look like, and maybe will be like, an illegal black market where we buy kidneys from poor people. So right now, what we're thinking about is establishing connections with Philippine surgeons and establishing escrow funds that will take care of immunosuppressive drugs. But I mention this because it's just as much a part of the market design as anything else. Markets need social support. If you propose, if we try to create a market, if we try to extend kidney exchange to foreign pairs, and it works badly for them, then it'll be a bad market, right? So the whole point of market design is that markets are human artifacts. We have to make them do what we want. We have to make them, markets are instruments to allow people to cooperate with each other, and when they're not working well, we should fix them, or perhaps if we can't fix them, ban them, right? And so again, I spent lunchtime talking about why we don't allow kidneys to be bought and sold, and what other kinds of transactions over historical time we have not allowed to be transacted, and how we've sometimes changed our mind in dramatic ways. So let me end by saying that matching markets are some of the most interesting human artifacts and some of the most important, right? When we think about markets, often we think about commodity markets, and commodity markets are pretty interesting too and require a lot of design. You know, a commodity requires design, right? Every field of wheat is different, right? If you wanted to buy wheat in the 1800s, you had to inspect it to find out what you were going to get. But, you know, in my book I say, God made wheat, but the Chicago Board of Trade made number 2 hard red winter wheat. And the thing about number 2 hard red winter wheat is you don't have to inspect it anymore before you buy it. It's specified well enough. It's a commodity. You know what you're getting. And that lets the Chicago Board of Trade be a commodity market whose only job is price discovery, making sure that supply equals demand. But many of these other markets, many of the most important markets that we deal with aren't commodity markets, and prices don't do all the work. And they're not anonymous. We care who we deal with. So school choices like this, and job markets, and marriage markets, and kidney exchange. And so one thing I want to leave you with is the idea that you can look around you and you can see matching markets working well or badly all around you, and think about how to navigate them and how to fix them. And one that I see now when I read the newspapers is refugee resettlement. Okay? Right now there are a lot of displaced people in the world. Some of them are internally displaced in Syria and the Ukraine. Some of them are externally displaced. They've walked across borders and they need to find people. And right now, we in the US, I'm not quite sure what the Canadian situation is, but we in the US and people in Europe, we certainly don't have great policies for dealing with them. And when we talk about it, we talk about where to send refugees. Well, when I say that refugee resettlement is a matching market, what I mean is it's precisely the kind of market where you can't just send people. Refugees are exactly the people who, when they're someplace they don't want to be, they get up and move. That's what makes them refugees. So in the United States, we have this idea, we had this idea, I think we're coming to change it, but we had this idea that refugees should be resettled thinly around the country, that it would help them assimilate if there were not too many of them in any one place. Well, once you come to the United States, you can get on a Greyhound bus and go wherever you want. So it turns out a lot of Somali migrants to the United States are in Lewiston, Maine. Now, Lewiston, Maine is not a big town in Maine. Maine is not a place with weather that's a lot like Somalia, but it's a little like Canada. But it turns out what Lewiston, Maine has that other American communities don't is Somalis. And if you are sitting in Wisconsin, where the Immigration Service has suggested you could have a subsidized apartment and start learning English, you quickly figure out that it would be more fun to be in Lewiston, Maine, and you leave your subsidized apartment and you go to Lewiston, where you can probably find work while learning English, right? If you are a Mandarin speaker and you come to Wisconsin, maybe the only language help you could get would be in applying for assistance, because you can't work in Wisconsin if you don't speak English. But if you come to California and you were, say, a carpenter in China, well, you can find someone who will hire you as a carpenter before you learn to speak English. And he'll speak to you in Mandarin, and he'll speak to the customers in English, and you'll learn English when you can. In the meantime, you'll be gainfully employed. So there's a lot of sense in getting information from refugees. It's a little like school choice about where they would like to go. Not everyone can go where they want. It's also like school choice. But gathering information in a safe way. And that's just what we don't do now with the current refugee situation, because the international rules about refugees is that you're supposed to get asylum in your country of first asylum. The first place that you reach, you're supposed to identify yourself and be fingerprinted, and that's where you are. And so, of course, people who are coming in small boats from Turkey and landing in Greece, but who don't want to end up in Greece, who want to end up in Sweden or Germany or England or France, they have to avoid the Greek authorities. And the Greek authorities have every incentive also to avoid meeting these people so that they can find their way to Germany. So part of operating a matching market is we have to make it safe to exchange the necessary information. Where are you from? What languages do you speak? Where are your family members? What's your profession? Let's try to find a place where you can go. And of course, we might be able to make attractive places for people to go that they don't initially think of, right? Lewiston, Maine is an attractive place for Somali people to go. So refugees aren't widgets. You can't place them where you want them. You may not be able to send them where they want to go, but we clearly have to do a better job about learning where they would fit in, where they could be easily assimilated in the community, so we can make the good matches. And of course, there are many, many matching markets in the world, and in which we care who we deal with, and we care who gets what. And maybe I'll just stop here and open the floor for questions. Thank you.
Okay, so we will start with questions. There's 2 microphones at both sides of the room. Come forward and keep your question clear and brief.
There have been instances of people backing out of kidney operations and cheating the system, and they've been widely reported recently. How do these incidents of people trying to cheat the system fit into your terminology and your analysis? And have you been thinking of ways to cut down on that problem?
Absolutely. So, good question. How about people trying to cheat the system in various ways? So, needless to say, with transplantation, there are actually lots of systems to talk about. So, the things you read about in the newspaper are normally deceased donor allocation. And they're, at least in the United States, and I think very similarly in Canada, but I'm not sure, we have pretty elaborately defined rules about who should get the next deceased donor that's eligible and so forth. And many of the cases you read about cheating are people manipulating, in some sense, the queue order. So, but these are different for different organs. In the United States, for kidneys, you mostly get priority by having been ill for a long time. So you wait. With livers, you mostly get priority by being very ill, by being near death's door. That's because there's no liver dialysis, so you can't wait when you're ill. And one of the things that sometimes used to happen is hospitals would pretend their patients were sicker than they were. There have been some changes in the way how sick you are is determined that try to deal with that. But these are life and death situations, so of course there are times when people will cheat. Now, one interesting thought about how people might cheat is in these non-simultaneous chains that I told you about. One thing you could imagine is that if we give your sister a kidney today and then say to you, how about next Thursday you come in and donate a kidney as you indicated you would, you say, you know, I've changed my mind now. And remember, you can't write a contract on a kidney. You can't give valuable consideration. So these are all gifts. And the special thing about a gift is you can change your mind. It's not a contract. We only have about 2% broken links in the non-simultaneous parts of our chains. So there are some broken links, and some of them are through people reneging. Some of them are through changes in medical conditions. Someone comes to give a kidney as planned, and the hospital says to her, did you know that you're pregnant? And you know, that's the end of that. But sometimes people break their word, but very seldom. About 2% is the total figure. Let's think why that could be the case. Supposing when I go to visit my family for Thanksgiving next Thursday, someone says, bad news, I need a kidney. And I say to them, not a problem, I'm a vigorous 60-something-year-old, I'd be glad to give you mine. And it turns out we're incompatible, but I go into kidney exchange with my relative. Well, at every subsequent Thanksgiving, the family is going to tell that story. It's going to be part of our mythology forever, how much I loved my cousin or whoever it was enough to give them a kidney. Of course, the story will be considerably different if it turns out that I didn't give my kidney. And that after my cousin had gotten her kidney, I'd changed my mind. And instead of being told over the dinner table, it will be told quietly in corners, you know, in pairs. So you could see that, you know, even if I'm not a naturally charitable person, I might really hesitate to renege on my promise to give a kidney. So I'm not quite sure what goes on. Often, you know, there's a part of economics called behavioral economics where we try to model people more realistically than we traditionally have. And one thing is that in many circumstances, people are a lot nicer than we often give them credit for. I'm not positive that's all that's going on here. You know, it's complicated. But as a statistical matter, when we have a non-simultaneous link in the chain, it almost always goes through. Now, that being said, let me say that you won't be nominated to be the non-simultaneous link in the chain unless the nurse coordinators like you, right? The nurse coordinators sometimes say, you know, I'm not convinced that so-and-so is really committed. Let's make them part of one of the simultaneous links. You know, we do them 6 at a time. But, you know, this guy here, he seems really committed. I think we can rely on him to show up next Monday.
That's just simply fascinating. I was thinking about one of the problems in organ donation is getting people to sign up for as donors in the event of their death, which is a funny phrase because everyone will die. Have you thought of market approaches to encouraging more people to sign up? For example, promising that you have a better place on a list if you need an organ while you're still alive. Have you turned your mind to that problem?
Right. Well, so Israel just operationalized legislation that does exactly that. In Israel, you get priority for deceased organ donors if you yourself have been a registered donor for at least 3 years, or if you are the next of kin of someone whose organs were successfully donated. And that's because Israel, like many countries in the West, depends not just on the donor's intent, but on the consent of the next of kin. So if you are willing to be organ donors on your death, you should not only register in the Canadian organ donor registries, but you should tell your family so that they know that that's your intention. But yes, so in Israel that's been done. In the United States, we don't do that for registration. Again, you know, the Justice Department would probably refuse to write us a memo saying that it was legal. But we do give priority for deceased donors to living donors who later need a kidney. There aren't so many of them because you have to be pretty healthy to give a kidney, but that is a recognized part of the American priority system.
Could you speak a little bit about the school board markets that you looked at? And in particular, I'm interested in the dimension of trust and safety.
Yeah.
And were you looking at that? Were you able to influence that data, the new data that was given on both sides, both on the side of the parents looking for the school they wanted their children to attend, and also the information coming from the schools?
So we've had some success in both directions. Let me tell you how we used to do it, and still do it in many cities, how we used to do it badly. Okay? So in the city of Boston, the way so many cities that we've dealt with had congested systems. They had just systems that, New York City has to put 85,000 children into ninth grade each year. That's a lot. They used to try to do it through the mail, getting information back and forth. So at the end of August, they had 30,000 kids just left who hadn't been assigned yet, and they had to assign them without regard to their preferences. So that was a mess of a different sort. But Boston already had a centralized school choice system in which they invited parents to say, what's your first choice, what's your second choice, what's your third choice, and in which they assigned children priority for each school in case there were more children who wanted to go there than there was capacity. And the kind of priorities would be if there was an older sibling who already went to the school, that gave you quite high priority. If you lived within walking distance of the school, that gave you some priority. And then they gave random numbers to break ties when they needed to. And then they did this very benign thing, benignly intended thing. They said, we will take these lists of choices that the parents give us, and we will try to give as many children as possible their first choice. And after we've done that, we'll give as many children remaining as possible their second choice, and so forth. And of course, this makes it extremely unsafe to confide in the Boston public schools what's really your first choice, because if you don't have high priority at your first choice and you don't get it, there's an excellent chance that every place in your second choice will have been filled by people who said it was their first choice. So what you have to do to get your kid into a school under that old system, the immediate acceptance algorithm we call it, what you have to do is you have to decide what is the school, the best school, that if I name it as my first choice, I can get my kid into with high probability, which is a very, very different thing than saying what's the best school for my kid. What we now do is we have a system that does make it safe for you to say what's the best school for my kid. Loosely speaking, the way it does this is it guarantees you, it's organized in a way that has the property that if you fail to get your first school, your first choice, your chance of getting your second choice will be just as great as if you had listed it as your first choice. And we've done that in New York and in Boston and in Denver and in New Orleans and in some parts of the Newark system. You ask about trust of the school board. In many places, it's possible with the web and things like that to make results of standardized tests and some kinds of statistics like that easily accessible to a large, but not 100% proportion of the parent population. In New Orleans, the school district is called the New Orleans Recovery School District, recovery from the hurricane. People didn't trust the school district for historical reasons. And for the first several years, New Orleans didn't run its school choice. My colleague Attila Abdelkaderoglu did on his laptop. And it comforted people to know that a tenured economist at Duke University was running the system the way it was claimed to be run. Now they've taken it in, and it runs pretty well. But there was that issue of, even when we explained how the system worked, did people think that that was how it worked, or that that there were other ways to get into school? And one of the first things we do when we're called into a new city is we say to them, how does your current school district work? Show us how you assigned children to schools last year, and then show us who showed up in which classes this year. And when those numbers are very different, there's sometimes reason not to trust the school board.
Sort of trap here. I'll just talk loudly.
Go for it.
Refugee and migrant resettlement issue.
Yeah.
So pretty big issue in Canada right now. The election just happened, and everyone's talking about that.
Yeah, we're having an election too sometime.
And so countries like Germany are being swamped on. How would you suggest we solve this problem? Because there's lots of people here who want to help, and there's people there who want to help, and there's people who don't want to help.
Right.
How do we solve that?
Right.
In your idealized world, globally, how do we solve that?
Well, one thing that Canada has that Germany does not is the Atlantic Ocean. Right, so no one is coming in small rubber boats from Turkey into Canada. So Canadians have an opportunity to think about who they want to invite and how they want to go about choosing who to invite. Right now, this is not something that, an opportunity that Germany really has, because people are flowing across borders in uncontrolled ways. They're not, of course, immediately getting to Germany, but as I mentioned, Greece, Hungary, those places all have plenty of incentive not to see them as they pass through, and to pass them through quickly, because they don't want to resettle them. Now, in the United States, many of our illegal migrants are not refugees under the terms of how the United Nations defines refugees, but they're illegal migrants, and they walk across the border from Mexico, coming from further south. And a fact of the matter, and it does play a role in our elections also, is that there are a lot of them. And we have not been effective, however much we want or should want to do, we have not been effective in preventing them from coming. So the problem is how to manage those who come. What should be the path to citizenship for people who already live in the United States, for instance. I think Canada has less of that problem too. Canada it's harder for big groups of refugees or migrants to walk into Canada. So the more you have a choice about who you invite in, the more you can think about what should be your resettlement policy. And of course, immigration can be a powerful force for good in a country. The reason the United States and Canada have different demographic distributions than Europe is we have been places that had immigrants forever. And by and large, that's good for us. By and large, immigrants are younger than the native population and are going to contribute to Social Security and to be part of the labor force for a long time. But we have to invite in and welcome immigrants in ways that allows them to become productive members of the society. So I think that here in North America, we face less of a crisis situation and more of an opportunity to design immigration policies. Of course, having the opportunity doesn't mean we'll do a good job. In the US too, it's a political football. And a very popular political position is, I'm in, let's not let anyone else in. Because we all came from somewhere, at least many of us did. So market design in every application is a political process, because there are lots of interested parties. So I think it's a very natural part of our political process. I hope that we will develop sensible procedures, and what I mean by sensible is ways of inviting and settling people who will then lead productive lives as Canadian and American citizens. I'm not terribly optimistic that we will.
Back to kidneys momentarily. Is this? I'll just speak like taking a totally different tangent in terms of the economics. Wondering about kidney disease. Is it heavily lifestyle influence, or is it overwhelmingly genetic? And if it's lifestyle, then these are very expensive transplants and dialysis. What about health promotion and things? Is there lifestyle, diet?
Health promotion is always a great idea. I should preface anything I say with saying that I skipped all the lectures in medical school. So, I'm an economist. Kidney disease, diabetes is a big cause. Obesity and high blood pressure are big causes. Some of those have lifestyle components, some are not. Polycystic kidney disease is purely genetic. So there are some things that are clearly not lifestyle at all. There are some that may partially be. I'm hardly qualified to say. It would be nice to be able to cure diabetes or to prevent it. That would be a big help. We clearly don't do enough about that. In the United States, I know less about the Canadian healthcare system than I know about the United States. We have a very piecemeal system, which makes it actually hard to fund, say, a nutrition clinic that will help diabetes patients control their disease, but easy to fund a transplant or an amputation or dialysis. So we do less preventive care than we should. It's certainly a good thing to do. With big problems like this, the right answer is that we have to fight them on every front. So absolutely. I anticipate that my grandchildren and yours will find the idea of transplantation to be a sort of an appalling artifact of primitive medicine. You know, they'll say to you, tell me again, Grandpa, you used to cut kidneys out of a healthy person and sew them into a sick person, and this was modern medicine? And we'll say, yeah, that was the best we could do. That was modern medicine. Isn't it wonderful that now we can grow our own new kidneys, or grow them in farm animals, or that we don't have kidney disease anymore? Those will all be great things. But we can't wait for them, because everyone who needs a kidney today will be dead by the time those things have come to pass. So partly we have a responsibility to deal with the world as we find it, and not as we hope it will be.
Yeah, so I'll try and broadcast my question here. So something I was thinking about was a lot of the problems and the complexity that you're discussing here in terms of the simultaneous exchanges and so on, you know, could be dealt with by the possibility of writing binding contracts.
Yeah.
But then you start thinking about binding contracts for these things, and you start thinking about the nature of voluntary and rationality and so on.
Well, how would the judges deal with breach of contract? Would they require you to give your kidney, for instance?
Right. Well, that's kind of what you would be doing, right? So what I'm wondering about is you're getting around that inability to write a contract through these things. Do you ever worry about that you're confronting similar sorts of issues in terms of what voluntary means and whether, rationality?
Yep. Good question. So do I worry that we're confronting issues of what's voluntary? So I gave a talk at lunch today on repugnant transactions, and how are we to understand the laws around the world against buying and selling kidneys. And one of the arguments that comes up goes under the name of coercion. And it says, one danger of offering people lots of money is maybe you take some of the agency away from them. Maybe you take away the voluntariness and somehow coerce them and possibly harm them by offering them lots of money. And I spoke a bit about how to make sense of that kind of argument and what we can think about it. When you talk to Iranian surgeons, where there is a monetary market, they say, of course there's lots of kinds of coercion. If your sister needs a kidney and your mom thinks you should give her one, you're coerced. So people are complicated, right? There's a rule in the discussion in the ethical literature, the ethicist literature, which says that if you're talking about why people shouldn't be allowed to buy kidneys, you're not allowed to talk about the fact that people are dying of kidney disease. And if you're talking about the fact that people are dying of kidney disease, you're not allowed to talk about coercion. Economists think about trade-offs, right? It turns out transplantation is not so great. You have to get an organ from a dead person, or from, in the kidney case, a healthy person, in order to cure a sick person. These are complicated decisions, but they save lives, so they're worth addressing. It doesn't mean they're going to be simple. And so coercion is a complicated story. I mean, I spoke for an hour at lunch today. I could speak for much longer. There are lots of ways to be coerced. Being coerced by being offered a lot of money is not the easiest kind of coercion for me to understand. There are worse ways to be coerced.
So my question is about how the decisions for markets make and who makes those decisions. So in your kidney exchange, in the graph you showed us, at any given point in time, there may be multiple chains, right? So there's a choice to be made.
Absolutely.
And sometimes, like the goal for the system may be in conflict with the goal of the individuals. So I imagine the individuals want to have a transplant as soon as possible, but the system may want to have as many as possible. Mm-hmm. So who makes that decision? And also, as time goes by, because it's an ongoing market, right? As time goes by, there's new information coming into the market, and that optimal choice may change. So when do you make that decision?
Yep, those are good questions, and they are made in somewhat disorderly ways. One of the things I should say, so we do some kind of optimization, and we publish a match that is a suggestion to the hospitals and surgeons and patients and donors involved. Many of those suggestions are rejected, right? So the way transplants actually happen, you look at that graph and I show you an optimal matching. That's something that we publish every time we do an optimization. We push it out to the transplant centers. We say, here's what we think. This kidney should go into your patient, and your donor should give a kidney to this other patient, and so forth. The refusals come from the surgeons responsible for receiving the kidneys. Sometimes they say, my patient is doing pretty well, we're going to wait for a higher quality kidney than that. We won't take that one. So, and of course, if you propose a three-way exchange and one of the links is rejected, then all three of them fail. So we were having quite a high rate of rejections. So we did a number of things. Market design isn't just analytical, a lot of it is operational. So we tried to elicit better in advance the preferences of the surgeons. So the first thought we had was we would show the surgeons the whole compatibility graph, and we'd say, look at all your patients, see all the possible kidneys you could be offered. If there are some that you wouldn't take because the donor is too old or has too high blood pressure or whatever, tell us now, just cross them off. We'll take those arrows off the compatibility graph, and then we'll never offer them to you, and we'll make better use of the time we have and cut through the congestion. Turns out surgeons wouldn't do that. It's a little hard to assess, to look at a kidney and decide, look at the patient information and decide. And we were basically proposing that we would show them many kidneys that they would never get offered, and they should spend some time telling us yes or no in advance, and they wouldn't do that. So what we did is we introduced a threshold language. We said, along with the compatibility information, tell us what's the oldest patient, your oldest donor you're prepared to accept a kidney from. What's the highest blood pressure? What's the highest body mass index? What's the worst creatinine clearance index? just give us some thresholds. And the surgeons, acting in the interest of their patients, give us pretty high thresholds. They say, well, if I'll set, the oldest patient I'll take will be 60 years old, and the highest body mass index will be, 28, and the highest blood pressure will be something. And then we show them a kidney that meets all their thresholds, and they turn it down. And we say, what's going on? And they say, well, when I said a 60-year-old, I meant a 60-year-old former Olympic athlete in wonderful health. And you showed me a, somewhat overweight, somewhat high blood pressure 58-year-old. My patient's doing pretty well right now, we'll wait. So what we're showing them now is, as you say, when you run an optimization of any sort, there are multiple optimal solutions. In particular, a lot of the multiplicity comes from the fact that there's a shortage of O donor organs and therefore a surplus of O blood type patients. So in every optimal solution, there's some multiplicity. You could give the O organs to different O patients. So what we do now is we try to, at the APD and at NKR, they do something a little different. We run a couple of, we produce a couple of optimal solutions according to an agreed objective function of optimality. And we show these. We show the transplant centers a few kidneys. We say, some of these kidneys might come to you in one of the optimal solutions to different patients. If there are any you wouldn't take, tell us now, so we'll cut through some of the congestion. So that gets us a higher rate of acceptance. But the thing about living donor kidneys is they belong to the living donor, right? So we can't mandate anything. So all these questions about speed, about how old a donor, all of those things have to be reviewed by everyone involved.
Now time to thanks everybody that made that possible. First, we should thanks again Professor Roth for a very, very insightful and entertaining